It happened so fast. His hand brushed against mine at the dinner table, and I froze. For him, maybe it was nothing, but for me, it was the moment everything changed. Subscribe now so you won't miss what happens next. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? The clink of silverware against porcelain had always been background noise in our house, the kind of sound you forget to notice. Dinner was routine. My mother chatting about her day, my stepfather listening with quiet patience, and me sitting across from them, nodding at the right moments. It was ordinary, safe, predictable, until it wasn't. My mother had gone into the kitchen to fetch dessert, humming faintly as she moved. The air seemed stiller without her at the table. That was when it happened. Small, accidental, impossible to forget. He and I reached for the same bowl of rice at the same time. His hand brushed mine, just barely, but long enough to jolt me like a spark of static. His skin was warm, rough at the edges, and though he pulled back immediately, the echo of that touch lingered in my veins. "Sorry," he muttered, his voice low, careful. "It's fine," I whispered, though my pulse was racing. By the time my mother returned with pie, the moment had already buried itself inside me, hidden but burning. She set the plates down with a smile, oblivious to the silence that had bloomed in her absence. He avoided my eyes. I avoided his, yet the weight of that avoidance was louder than any conversation. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't stop replaying it. The brush of his hand, the tremor in his voice, the quickness with which he looked away. I told myself it meant nothing, that it was just a clumsy accident. But accidents don't leave your heart racing hours later. Accidents don't replay in your head until the ceiling above you feels like it's pressing down. The morning light didn't soften the memory. When I came downstairs, he was already at the table with a newspaper, a half-empty mug of coffee in front of him. He glanced up briefly, then back down as if the headlines were urgent enough to erase everything else. "Morning," I said, my voice thin. "Morning," he replied, clipped, polite. He poured me coffee, sliding the cup across the table like always. But when I reached for it, his fingers jerked back too quickly, and the mug clinked harder against the wood. The sound echoed, too loud in the quiet kitchen. I forced a smile, but his eyes stayed on the paper. We both pretended nothing had shifted. But pretending only made it worse. Later, in the hallway, we passed each other. Too close. My shoulder brushed his arm, and we both flinched like we'd been caught in a crime. His eyes flicked to mine, startled, guilty. Neither of us spoke. The silence wrapped around us like a secret no one else could hear. At dinner, my mother filled the air with stories about her coworker, about groceries, about everything that didn't matter. I sat quietly, pretending to listen, while every sense of mine was tuned to him, his silence, his rare nods, the way his jaw tightened when I moved too suddenly. Afterward, in the kitchen, I carried my plate in as he rinsed a glass. I stepped beside him, and our shoulders touched for a second. It should have been nothing, just proximity, but it wasn't. "Excuse me," I murmured. "Sorry," he said, stepping aside too quickly. His voice cracked faintly on the word. Our eyes met just a second, no longer. But the second was enough. I retreated upstairs, my heart pounding. I told myself again it was nothing, that I was imagining it, that I was foolish to think a brush of the hand or the shoulder could mean anything more. But deep down, I knew. It wasn't nothing. It was the start of something neither of us had words for. The house felt different the next morning, though everything looked the same. The kitchen still smelled of coffee, sunlight still poured through the same curtains, and the familiar ticking of the wall clock still marked each second. But beneath it all, the silence had shifted thicker now, more deliberate, as if both of us were working too hard to keep it alive. He sat at the table when I walked in, the newspaper open though he wasn't really reading. His mug of coffee steamed faintly, and his fingers tapped the rim with a rhythm too steady to be natural. He looked up once, briefly, then back down. "Morning," I said, forcing my voice to sound casual. "Morning." His reply was flat, clipped, as though even that single word was too risky. I poured cereal into a bowl, the clatter of flakes against porcelain louder than usual. Sitting down across from him, I felt the weight of his silence pressing against me. My mother's absence made it heavier. She had already left for work, leaving just the two of us in the stillness. I wanted to speak, to break the tension, to laugh about how ridiculous it was to treat one clumsy touch like something monumental. But when I opened my mouth, nothing came out. Words dissolved on my tongue. The memory of his hand brushing mine still lingered, too sharp to dismiss, too dangerous to name. We ate in near silence. The sound of spoons, the scrape of chairs, the rustle of the newspaper, everything felt amplified. When I stood to clear my bowl, I caught his eyes on me. He looked away immediately, almost guiltily. The rest of the day stretched long. He worked in the garage, fixing something that wasn't broken. I drifted through the house like a shadow, unable to focus on anything. My phone sat untouched, my book unopened. Every sound from downstairs footsteps, the clink of tools pulled at me like gravity. In the afternoon, I found him in the living room. The television was on, muted, flickering light across his face. He stared at it without seeing. I paused at the doorway, debating whether to retreat, but something rooted me in place. He noticed me and shifted uncomfortably. Need something? Number. My voice came out softer than I meant. I crossed the room anyway, settling into the far corner of the couch. The air felt charged, buzzing with things unsaid. Minutes stretched, the silence wrapping around us. I picked up the remote from the table, turning the volume up slightly. He leaned forward at the same time, reaching for the same remote. Our hands nearly touched again. We froze. This time, neither of us laughed it off. I set the remote down quickly, my fingers trembling, and leaned back into the couch. He cleared his throat. I didn't mean, I know, I interrupted too quickly. But the truth was, I didn't know. And he didn't finish his sentence. The air between us stayed thick, heavy, alive. That night, dinner was quiet. My mother spoke about a new project at work, her words filling the gaps we left. I nodded at the right times, but my thoughts weren't on her stories. They were on the silence that stretched between me and him. A silence so fragile it felt like a single word could shatter it. Afterward, I carried dishes into the kitchen. He followed with a stack of plates. When he set them down beside me, our shoulders brushed. Not hard, not deliberate, just contact in a narrow space. But it jolted me all the same. I inhaled sharply, and he stepped back too fast, knocking a glass against the sink. Sorry, he muttered, voice rough. It's fine, I whispered, the same words I had said before, but my hands were shaking as I rinsed the plate. We finished in silence, the only sounds the rush of water and the clink of dishes. When I turned, he was already gone, retreating into another room as though distance was the only defense he had left. That night in bed, I replayed the day in fragments, the clipped morning, the almost touch on the couch, the brush of shoulders in the kitchen. It was nothing, I told myself again. Nothing more than accidents strung together. But accidents don't feel like this. I rolled over, burying my face in the pillow. My chest ached with something unnamed, something I couldn't shake. I thought of the way his voice had cracked when he said sorry, the way he hadn't finished his sentence on the couch. It wasn't just me. He felt it too. The silence wasn't protecting us anymore. It was exposing us. And if silence could say this much, I couldn't imagine what would happen if either of us finally spoke. The days that followed were defined by distance, but not the kind that comes naturally. It was deliberate, careful, practiced. He moved around the house as though tracing invisible lines that kept him just far enough away, and I mirrored him without even realizing. If he entered the kitchen, I waited until he left before stepping in. If I heard his footsteps on the stairs, I lingered in my room until silence returned. It was a dance of avoidance, choreographed by fear of what neither of us wanted to name. And yet, the more we tried to keep space, the more the world seemed to conspire against us. On Wednesday morning, the toaster jammed. I was struggling with it, pressing the lever down again and again when he walked in. He set his coffee mug on the counter and reached over my shoulder to fix it. His hand brushed the metal lever, his arm grazing mine. I froze. For a moment, I thought he would retreat, but he didn't. He leaned in closer, tugged the toaster free, and pulled the bread out. Then, finally, he stepped back. Be careful with it, he said, his voice calm but too steady, like it had been rehearsed. I nodded, unable to look at him. My skin still tingled where he'd leaned against me. That afternoon, I sat on the porch with a book, trying to lose myself in words that weren't mine. The air was heavy. the kind of thick summer heat that clings to your skin. I heard the screen door creak, and he stepped out with a glass of lemonade in hand. He hesitated, as if he might turn back, but then he sat at the other end of the porch. We sat in silence, the cicadas filling the air with their endless hum. I pretended to read, but I was hyper-aware of every sound he made, the ice clinking in his glass, the quiet sigh he let out, the way his foot tapped against the wood. I wanted to speak, to say something light, anything to cut through the weight between us. But the words never came. When the sky began to darken, he stood and went back inside. The moment he closed the door, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. By Friday, I convinced myself it would be easier if we didn't try so hard to stay apart. Avoidance wasn't helping. It only made the tension sharper. So when he asked if I could help him in the garage, I agreed. The space smelled of sawdust and oil, cluttered with tools and half-forgotten boxes. He handed me one of the cartons to carry, our fingers brushing. This time, neither of us jerked away immediately. The touch lingered for a second, too short to be deliberate, too long to be dismissed. My chest tightened. He cleared his throat and let go of the box, stepping back. We worked side by side, stacking, sweeping, organizing. The radio on the shelf played softly, old songs from a time before I was born. To my surprise, he hummed along under his breath. The sound was low, almost shy, and it made me smile. "You know this one?" I asked without thinking. He glanced at me, startled, then nodded. "Your mom used to play it all the time." I hummed a few bars myself, and his expression softened. For a moment, it felt normal. Just two people cleaning a garage, sharing a song. But beneath that moment was the constant hum of something else, something neither of us dared name. When the sun began to set, painting the windows orange, we sat on the steps to rest. A pitcher of lemonade sat between us. I sipped mine slowly, the ice melting fast in the heat. "You don't smile much," he said suddenly, his eyes fixed on the yard. I turned to him, startled. "I do." He shook his head slightly. "Not really. When you smile for real, it's different. It lights up your whole face." The words caught me off guard. No one had ever said that to me. My throat tightened, and I forced a laugh to cover it. "That's cheesy. Doesn't mean it's not true," he said quietly, finally looking at me. Our eyes locked, and for a moment, the world seemed to still. The cicadas, the fading light, the warm air, all of it faded until there was only the weight of his gaze. My chest ached with the pull of it, the dangerous closeness of something we both knew we shouldn't feel. I looked away first. "We should go inside," I murmured. "Yeah," he agreed, though his voice was reluctant. We stood, careful not to brush against each other as we moved. Inside, the house felt cooler, quieter, but the silence between us followed like a shadow. That night, lying in bed, I realized something terrifying. Distance wasn't protecting us. It was pulling us closer. The silence, the careful avoidance, the deliberate space, it only sharpened the edges of everything left unsaid. It wasn't avoidance anymore. It was gravity, and no matter how far we tried to step apart, we kept finding ourselves pulled back together. The house felt unusually hollow that Sunday evening. My mother had gone to visit a friend, leaving behind a stillness that wrapped around every corner. The sun bled gold across the living room floor as I sat curled on the couch, a book open on my lap, the words on the page blurred, unread. My attention was tuned elsewhere, to the creak of floorboards, the faint shift of air, the knowledge that he was somewhere in the house. When he appeared in the doorway, he paused, almost hesitant, like he was considering retreat. But after a moment, he stepped in and lowered himself to the far end of the couch. The distance between us was measured, too careful. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the floor as if it could swallow him whole. I tried to focus on my book, but the silence pressed heavy. Every breath felt amplified, every movement deliberate. I could feel his presence like a heat radiating across the space, and it unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. Minutes passed, the air thick with unsaid words. Finally he spoke. "About the other night, in the garage." My head lifted. His voice was rough, almost unwilling but honest. "You don't have to explain," I said quickly, though my pulse betrayed me. "I think I do." He didn't look at me, but the weight in his tone was impossible to ignore. I closed my book and set it carefully aside, my fingers trembling. "Then say it." For a long time, he said nothing. His jaw tightened, his hands clasped loosely together as though he was fighting himself. Finally, he exhaled. "I shouldn't have said those things. I shouldn't have let it get that far." My chest tightened. I remembered every word he'd spoken, every flicker of truth that had slipped through his restraint. It would have been so easy. "You meant it," I said softly. His head snapped toward me, eyes dark, conflicted. "That doesn't matter." "It does to me." My voice was barely above a whisper, but it seemed to hang between us like a fragile thread. His expression wavered. He looked away, his throat working as he swallowed hard. "You don't understand what you're saying." "I understand enough," I replied, the words sharper than I intended. He shook his head. "You think you do, but one day you'll look back and hate me for not stopping this before it goes too far." The words struck deep, but they didn't silence me. I leaned forward, my hands gripping the edge of the couch. "Then why does it feel like you're the one pulling away when you want to stay?" His breath caught, almost imperceptible. For a heartbeat, he looked like he might deny it, but the silence that followed was louder than any denial. I shifted closer, just a fraction, enough to feel the tension stretch taut between us. "Tell me I'm wrong," I whispered. His jaw clenched. His hands tightened together. He didn't tell me I was wrong. The air was heavy, thick with the weight of words we shouldn't say. My heart pounded so hard, I thought he might hear it. He turned toward me, eyes burning with something unspoken, something raw. For a second, I thought he might break, but he stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I can't." His voice cracked, and he cut himself off. He raked a hand through his hair, pacing a few steps before stopping, his back to me. I sat frozen, my fingers digging into the fabric of the couch. The distance between us now felt unbearable, like a punishment. He turned slightly, his voice quieter this time, almost pleading. "Please, don't make me say it." My throat burned, my eyes stung, but I forced the words out anyway. "You don't have to. I already know." His shoulders slumped, as though the fight in him had broken. The silence that followed was deafening. The sound of the clock ticking filled the room, each second dragging heavier than the last. Neither of us moved. Neither of us breathed too deeply. The moment hung suspended, fragile, dangerous. Then the front door creaked open, and my mother's voice floated into the house, cheerful and oblivious. "I'm back." He moved instantly. Putting distance between us, his expression shuddered. I snatched my book back into my hands, pretending to read, my pulse still thundering. By the time she entered the room, we looked like nothing had happened. Two people sitting in silence, each in their own world. But we both knew. The words we hadn't said were already too loud to forget. The next few days unfolded with an unsettling rhythm. On the surface, everything looked normal. My mother laughed at her phone in the kitchen, the laundry piled up in the basket, the dog barked at the mailman. From the outside, we were an ordinary family. But underneath, every ordinary moment carried a charge, an edge that felt sharper with each passing day. It was Tuesday afternoon when the first slip happened. I was in the kitchen, standing on my toes to reach a jar from the top shelf. My fingers barely grazed it, and before I could try again, he stepped in behind me. His hand reached up, easily grasping the jar. He passed it to me without a word, but in that instant, his body brushed mine. Heat shot through me, and I nearly dropped the glass. "Careful," he said softly, his voice low, close to my ear. I nodded, clutching the jar too tightly, unable to speak. He stepped back quickly, creating space again, but the moment lingered in the air long after he left the room. Later that evening, I sat at the dining table with my books spread out, pretending to study. He walked past, carrying a box of tools, and paused at the sight of my notes. "Geometry?" he asked, his tone casual. I nodded. "It's not my best subject." He set the box down and leaned over, scanning the problem I'd been stuck on. His hand brushed the edge of my paper, his arm so close I could feel the warmth radiating from him. He explained the steps slowly, carefully, his voice calm. I nodded along, though I barely heard the words. All I could focus on was the nearness, the gravity pulling me toward him despite the space he tried to keep. When he finished, he straightened abruptly, almost too quickly. "You'll get it," he said, picking up the box again. His tone was final, like a door closing. But the door never stayed closed. The following morning, we crossed paths in the hallway. My mother had already left, and the house was quiet. I carried a basket of laundry, and he came from the opposite end. The hallway was narrow, forcing us close as we passed. Our arms brushed, and the basket tilted dangerously in my hands. He reached out instinctively, steadying it, steadying me. For a heartbeat, his hand was on mine. Firm, warm. We froze. The world narrowed to the sound of our breaths, the closeness of our bodies in the narrow hall. His eyes locked on mine, searching, conflicted. Then he pulled his hand back as if burned, stepping aside quickly. "Sorry," he muttered. I nodded, clutching the basket, my heart hammering so loudly it drowned out everything else. That night, as I lay in bed, the silence pressed against me. I replayed each ordinary moment, the jar, the math problem, the brush in the hallway. Small things, nothing on their own. But together, they built something bigger, something I couldn't ignore. The next day brought rain. It started in the afternoon, heavy and sudden, drumming against the windows, filling the house with its steady rhythm. My mother had gone shopping, leaving me and him alone. The storm flickered the lights, and he lit a few candles in the living room, setting them on the table. I sat on the couch, watching the flames dance, listening to the rain. He joined me on the other end, the distance between us wide but not wide enough to erase the tension. The storm seemed to close us in, the walls shrinking, the silence deeper. I opened an old photo album from the shelf, flipping through the pages. "That's me," I said softly, pointing to a picture of myself as a child, mud-stained and grinning. He leaned closer to see. "You haven't changed that much," he said quietly. I turned another page, my throat tight. "I feel like I have." He hesitated, then spoke, his voice low. "You don't give yourself enough credit." Our eyes met. The room seemed still, the rain muffled, the candlelight flickering shadows across his face. Something unspoken stretched between us, fragile and dangerous. I closed the album slowly, my fingers trembling. "You're not supposed to say things like that." He inhaled sharply, sitting back. "You're right." His tone was final, but his eyes lingered on me longer than they should have. The storm outside raged, and inside, the silence between us grew heavier. I set the album aside and folded my arms, trying to steady myself. He looked away, but the weight of his words, the softness in his voice, stayed with me. By the time the rain eased, my mother returned, bags of groceries in her hands, filling the house with chatter and laughter. The spell broke instantly, and we both stepped back into our roles. But I couldn't forget. Ordinary moments weren't ordinary anymore. They had become dangerous, each one pulling us closer to something we couldn't take back. The morning after the storm, the air felt heavier, damp with the smell of wet earth. I stood barefoot on the porch, cradling a mug of coffee, watching the mist lift slowly from the yard. The house behind me was quiet, too quiet. He hadn't come downstairs yet, but I could already feel the tension humming, waiting, like static before lightning. When his footsteps finally creaked on the stairs, I didn't turn. I knew it was him. I could sense it, the way the air shifted when he entered a room. He joined me on the porch, silent at first, stretching like the morning itself hadn't yet settled into his bones. His t-shirt was wrinkled, his hair slightly mussed. He looked older and younger all at once, and that contradiction did something to me I couldn't quite name. "Morning," he said quietly. "Hey," I replied, my voice softer than I intended. We stood side by side, both staring out at the yard. The birds had returned after the storm, chirping in the trees like nothing had happened. But I couldn't shake the weight of what had passed between us, or the pull that seemed to grow stronger every time silence stretched too long. After a moment, he cleared his throat. "About yesterday." I gripped my mug tighter, bracing myself. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable," he said finally. I shook my head quickly. "You didn't." My voice was too sharp, too fast, and I added softer, "Not exactly." His eyes flicked toward me, searching. "Then what?" I hesitated. The truth pressed against my ribs, begging to be spoken, but saying it out loud felt like stepping off a cliff. I think I forgot what it feels like to be noticed, I admitted, staring into my coffee. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thick, alive. Finally, he said quietly, "You deserve to be noticed." I turned then, meeting his gaze. His eyes were steady, sincere, and that was what undid me. Not the touch, not the accidents, not even the silence, but the honesty I saw there. It left me feeling exposed, and yet I didn't look away. We stood there too long, close enough for the air to feel heavy between us. Then he pulled in a sharp breath and stepped back. He didn't finish. He just turned and went inside, leaving me on the porch with my heart racing. The rest of the day passed in fragments. He busied himself with chores, fixing a squeaky hinge, replacing a light bulb, wiping down counters that didn't need wiping. I pretended to read, to fold laundry, to do anything but watch him. Yet every time he entered the room, my body stiffened, aware. By late afternoon, the air shifted again. The sky darkened, though the storm had passed, and the house seemed to fold in on itself. I found him in the living room, flipping through an old album I'd left on the table. He looked up when I entered, caught in the act, but he didn't close it. "You were so small here," he said softly, pointing to a picture of me as a child, grinning with mud on my face. I moved closer, sitting at the other end of the couch. "That feels like a lifetime ago." "You've changed," he said. His voice wasn't casual, and it wasn't just an observation. I searched his face, my pulse quickening. "So have you." Our eyes locked. The album lay forgotten between us, open on a frozen memory, while the present pressed hard against us. "You remind me of someone I used to know," he said suddenly, his voice almost wistful. "Is that a good thing?" He hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yes, but it scares me too." The words hit deep. I wanted to ask why, but I already knew. It was the same reason my chest ached when he looked at me too long, the same reason I couldn't pull away even when I knew I should. The silence stretched, fragile. Then, slowly, he reached out. His hand touched mine, just barely, fingers resting lightly as if waiting for me to pull away. My breath caught. I didn't move. The warmth of his skin seeped into mine, spreading up my arm like fire. My heart pounded so loudly I thought it might shake the room. I looked at him, really looked, and saw everything he wasn't saying written plainly in his eyes. "You don't have to be afraid with me," he whispered. The words undid me. My throat tightened, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. I wanted to hold on to his hand, to close the space completely, to step off the edge we'd been circling, but I pulled back, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. The air snapped cold between us, and I stood quickly, forcing my voice steady. "I'll make tea." I walked to the kitchen, my hands shaking, my heart racing. Behind me, I felt his gaze linger, heavy, conflicted. That night I lay awake, listening to the hum of the house, the faint drip of rainwater outside. I replayed every second the touch of his hand, the softness in his voice, the honesty in his eyes. It wasn't just me. And it wasn't nothing anymore. The space between us was shrinking, and I didn't know how much longer it could hold. The morning light filtered through thin curtains, pale and hesitant. I sat at the kitchen table, tracing the rim of my mug, trying to steady the storm inside me. The night before still lived in my skin, the heat of his hand, the weight of his words, the way I had pulled back not because I wanted to, but because I had to. The memory was relentless, pulsing beneath the surface of everything. When he came downstairs, the air shifted instantly. He moved with a kind of restraint, deliberate in every motion. He poured coffee, opened the paper, sat across from me without lifting his eyes. From the outside, it looked ordinary, but I felt every second like a thread stretched too thin, ready to snap. "Sleep okay?" he asked finally, his voice steady, but too careful. "Not really," I admitted. His eyes flicked up at me, lingering for a moment before retreating back to the headlines. Me neither. The silence that followed wasn't comfortable. It buzzed, alive, daring one of us to break it. And for once, I did. "Why do we keep pretending?" The words slipped out before I could catch them. He froze, his hand tightening on the edge of the newspaper. Slowly, he folded it closed, set it down, and looked at me fully. His eyes were raw, conflicted, but steady. Because we have to. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. But that doesn't make it go away. No, he said softly. It doesn't. The truth between us was heavy now, undeniable. It lived in the silence, in every glance, in every brush of skin. Avoidance hadn't erased it. Distance hadn't weakened it. It was stronger, louder, demanding to be acknowledged. Later that afternoon, I was folding laundry in the living room when the power flickered. The lights dimmed, then went out completely. A summer storm had rolled in quickly, thunder growling low outside. The house fell into dim gray. The only light from the storm flashes beyond the windows. He appeared in the doorway, holding a candle he'd just lit. You okay? I nodded, though my pulse raced. The glow of the candle softened his face, shadows flickering across his jaw. He set it on the table and sat across from me. The storm pressed around us, heavy, enclosing. I don't like storms, I admitted, my voice low, almost drowned by the rain. I know, he said gently. You never did. The familiarity of it hit me how closely he had been watching, how much he remembered. Something broke inside me then, something I'd been holding too tightly. Why are you like this? I asked suddenly. Why do you notice things no one else does? Why do you... I trailed off, the words choking me. His gaze locked on mine, unwavering. Because I can't help it. The storm cracked overhead, thunder shaking the walls, but it was nothing compared to the tremor inside me. He leaned forward slightly, his voice rough. You think this is easy for me? Every day I tell myself to stop. Every day I remind myself of the lines I can't cross. But then you walk into a room and He cut himself off, his breath sharp. I sat frozen, my heart pounding, every nerve alive. And you what? I whispered. His hand flexed against his knee, restrained. And I forget how to pretend. The confession shattered something in the air between us. My breath caught, tears pricking the corners of my eyes. It was everything I had felt, everything I hadn't dared to speak, laid bare in his voice. For a moment, the storm outside disappeared. There was only the silence between us, no longer avoidance, no longer distance. It was honesty fragile, dangerous, but real. I reached out without thinking, my hand brushing his across the table. His eyes widened, and he didn't move. The candlelight flickered, casting us in shadows, making the moment feel suspended, untouchable. Then he pulled his hand back suddenly, standing so quickly the chair scraped. I can't, he said hoarsely, almost to himself. He raked a hand through his hair, pacing. I stood too, my chest aching. But you feel it, don't you? His jaw tightened. He didn't answer, but his silence was louder than words. The storm roared outside, rain hammering the windows. Inside, the space between us felt like it might collapse at any second. And I realized something. Then silence had always been our shield, our excuse, our fragile boundary. But now, silence wasn't enough. It had broken, and nothing would ever be the same. The storm carried into the night, restless and relentless. Rain hammered the roof, wind rattled the shutters, and every few minutes thunder split the sky with its roar. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The house felt alive, humming with a tension that had nothing to do with the weather. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the walls, pulled me deeper into awareness. I thought of the way he had looked at me earlier, the way silence had finally broken between us. His words still echoed in my chest. I forget how to pretend. I rolled over, burying my face in the pillow, but it didn't help. The storm outside was inside me now, pounding, restless. I couldn't escape it. Sometime past midnight, footsteps creaked on the stairs. Slow, careful. I held my breath, listening. They paused outside my door, then continued down the hall. A moment later, I heard the faint sound of the refrigerator door opening, then closing. I sat up, restless, torn between staying where I was and following. The house was too quiet without my mother. She had stayed overnight at her sister's, leaving the two of us alone. The thought pressed against me, heavy, undeniable. Finally, I slipped out of bed, my feet cold against the wooden floor. The hallway stretched long and dim, shadows flickering with each flash of lightning. I found him in the living room, sitting on the couch with his head in his hands. A single candle flickered on the table beside him. He looked up when I entered, surprise flickering across his face before being swallowed by something heavier. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked quietly. I shook my head. "You neither." He gave a soft, humorless laugh. Number. For a while, neither of us spoke. The storm filled the silence, thunder and rain punctuating the air. I lowered myself onto the other end of the couch, hugging my knees to my chest. The distance between us felt smaller than it was, the air too thick, too charged. "You shouldn't be here," he said finally, his voice strained. "Neither should you," I countered. And the truth of it hung between us. He rubbed his face with his hands, as if trying to erase the moment, the tension, everything. But when his eyes met mine, I saw it again, the same conflict, the same pull, the same storm mirrored inside him. "This isn't right," he whispered. "Then why does it feel like it is?" The words slipped out, reckless, unplanned. He inhaled sharply, like I'd struck him. For a moment I thought he would leave, retreat into another room, shut the door and lock it. But he stayed. The candlelight danced between us, shadows painting the walls. His shoulders sagged and his voice cracked when he said, "Because I don't trust myself around you anymore." My heart stopped. My breath caught in my throat. The storm outside thundered, rattling the windows, but all I could hear was him, those words, that confession. We sat suspended in silence, the kind that wasn't empty but full, overflowing with everything neither of us had dared to say. I wanted to reach out, to close the distance, to quiet the storm inside me with something real. But I didn't move. Neither did he. Instead, I leaned my head back against the couch, closing my eyes. "I'm tired of pretending," I whispered. When I opened my eyes, he was still watching me, his jaw tight, his hands gripping the edge of the couch like it was the only thing anchoring him. His gaze softened, almost painfully, and in that look was everything: fear, want, restraint, and something deeper, something I wasn't ready to name. A long moment passed, then he stood abruptly, blowing out the candle. The room fell into darkness, save for the brief flashes of lightning through the windows. "You should go back to bed," he said, his voice low, almost broken. I rose slowly, my knees weak, my chest aching. I passed him in the dark, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body, close enough that a single misstep would close the gap completely. My breath caught, and for a heartbeat, I thought he might reach out. But he didn't. I slipped back into my room, shutting the door softly behind me. I leaned against it, trembling, my heart racing. The storm outside raged, but it was nothing compared to the storm inside me. And for the first time, I knew with certainty there was no going back. The storm had passed by dawn, leaving the world hushed and damp. Drops of rain clung to the windows, catching the first pale light of morning. The house was quiet, but it wasn't the soft quiet of peace. It was the heavy quiet that comes after something has shifted, the kind you can't undo. I sat at the edge of my bed, the blanket twisted in my hands, listening to the familiar sounds of the house waking. The kettle whistled faintly in the kitchen. A cupboard opened, then closed. His footsteps moved across the floorboards, steady, careful, deliberate. I told myself to stay upstairs, to wait until he left the room. But my body had other plans. When I entered the kitchen, he was already there, pouring hot water into a mug. He looked up, startled, as if he hadn't expected me so soon. For a second, neither of us moved. Then he set the kettle down, too quickly, the clank of metal sharp against the counter. "Morning," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "Morning." His reply was stiff, clipped, like a line rehearsed. I moved to the cupboard for a glass, my hand brushing the handle at the same time his reached for it. We both froze, the faintest touch of skin against skin, enough to ignite every nerve in me. I pulled back quickly, clutching the glass too tightly. He stepped away, retreating to the far side of the counter. The silence pressed harder. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "Last night shouldn't have happened." I swallowed, my throat dry. Nothing happened. His eyes flicked to mine, sharp, almost pained. "You know that's not true." I couldn't deny it. The weight of what had passed between us, the words, the looks, the nearness, was too heavy to pretend away. We both knew it. I turned toward the window, watching the light filter through raindrops. "So what now?" I asked softly. He didn't answer right away. His hands gripped the edge of the counter, knuckles white. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "Now, we do nothing. We keep our distance. We stop this before—" "Before what?" I cut in, sharper than I meant. His eyes locked on mine, raw, conflicted. "Before it destroys everything." The words hung between us, harsh and true. My chest tightened, aching with the weight of them. I wanted to argue, to tell him that it was already too late, that pretending hadn't saved us before and wouldn't save us now. But the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I said quietly, "You think distance will fix it?" "It has to," he replied, almost desperate. The conversation ended there, but the silence that followed was worse. We moved around the kitchen like strangers, careful not to touch, careful not to look too long. But every step, every glance, every breath carried the echo of what we weren't saying. The day dragged on, heavy with avoidance. He spent hours outside, fixing things that didn't need fixing. I drifted through the house, restless, unable to focus on anything. The walls felt too close, the air too thick. By evening, the house smelled of dinner roast chicken, potatoes, herbs. My mother had returned, cheerful and oblivious, filling the air with chatter about her trip. I sat at the table, nodding at her stories, while across from me he stayed silent, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on his plate. At one point, her phone buzzed, and she excused herself to take the call in another room. The silence that followed her absence was immediate, suffocating. He looked up then, his eyes meeting mine for the first time all day. The weight of it was unbearable. I opened my mouth to speak, but footsteps echoed back down the hall, and my mother re-entered, smiling, still mid-story. The moment collapsed. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling, replaying every second of the day. His words echoed in my head, "Before it destroys everything." But even as I turned them over, I knew the truth. It was already too late for distance, already too late for silence. The line had shifted, blurred, broken, and no matter how hard we tried, there was no going back. The only question now was what would happen when the last fragile barrier finally fell. The days after the storm blurred together. On the surface, life returned to its routine work, chores, meals, the ordinary rhythm of a household. My mother laughed at her phone, made grocery lists, hummed as she cooked. Everything looked the same. But beneath it all, something had shifted so completely that pretending felt like wearing someone else's skin. I could feel it every time he entered a room. The silence wasn't silence anymore. It was weight, thick and unspoken. We avoided each other, but avoidance only sharpened the edges. Distance became unbearable, like holding back the tide with bare hands. It was late one evening when it finally happened. My mother had gone out to dinner with a friend, leaving us alone again. The house was quiet, except for the ticking of the clock and the faint hum of the refrigerator. I was in the living room, curled on the couch with a blanket, staring at a book I wasn't reading. He entered slowly, almost reluctantly, like he'd tried to stay away but couldn't. He sat on the far end of the couch, the distance between us wide but useless. The air stretched taut, alive with everything unsaid. Minutes passed. Neither of us spoke. The silence was unbearable. Finally, I whispered, "We can't keep doing this." His head turned, his eyes locking on mine. They were tired, conflicted, raw. "I know." The words hung between us, terrifying in their honesty. My chest ached, my throat tight. Then what? He leaned forward, his hands clasped together, his voice low. "I've tried to stop this. Every day I've told myself to pull back, to keep the line where it belongs. But every time I see you," he broke off, shaking his head, "I can't pretend anymore." The world seemed to still. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I swallowed, forcing the words past my lips. "Neither can I." The room felt smaller, the air heavier. We stared at each other, the truth finally spoken, dangerous and undeniable. For a moment, no one moved. Then he reached out, his hand brushing mine, not accidental this time, not a slip or a mistake. Deliberate, honest. I froze, my breath catching. The warmth of his touch was fire and gravity all at once. I wanted to pull away, to run, to erase the moment. But I didn't. I let it stay. "This will change everything," he whispered, his voice hoarse. I know. My reply was steady, though my heart was anything but. The silence that followed wasn't avoidance anymore. It was acceptance. We sat there, hands barely touching, the world narrowing to the space between us. My chest ached with the weight of it, with the knowledge that there was no undoing what had just been admitted. No way to return to the safety of before. When my mother's car pulled into the driveway, the spell broke instantly. He pulled his hand back, retreating to the other end of the couch. I grabbed my book, opening it blindly. By the time she walked in, smiling, setting her purse down, the room looked ordinary again. Two people sitting apart, nothing unusual at all. But the truth had already been spoken. That night, lying awake in bed, I replayed all the words, the look in his eyes, the touch of his hand. I knew we had reached the point of no return. We hadn't crossed the line completely, but the line itself was gone, blurred into nothing. What came next, I didn't know. But I knew this. Silence wouldn't save us anymore. Pretending wouldn't protect us. The storm inside had already broken free. And there was no going back. That's the end of this story. If you've been following from the beginning, you know this wasn't just about what happened between two people. It was about silence, about longing, about the lines we draw, and what happens when they blur. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And don't forget to subscribe, so you never miss the next story that will leave you questioning what you thought you knew.